Deep cranking. It's an effective way to catch big fish, and it's a good way to catch numbers too, especially when you get fish that are really competitive. In the fall, you can have it because they're ganged up on shad, but typically the ideal times for it are post-spawn. After fish leave the shallows, they're going to gang up away from the bank, recuperate from the spawn, and then they're going to start feeding real heavily again. And typically when they first get out deep in the spring, that's when they're most competitive. That's when you can really exploit them with a crankbait. And you can do it too, pre-spawn, all the way up through, I'd say, early fall. And but yeah, like I say, my favorite times to catch them is post-spawn. But all you really need, I like a medium heavy rod. I throw a medium rod some, but if the bigger the crankbait, the more power I want in the rod. And that's just, one, if you throw it all day, it won't wear you out as bad. And two, I feel like with that medium heavy rod and you're casting as far as possible, and you crank it down and get a bite way out there on the end of your cast. Well, if you're throwing it on mono and you got a spongy rod and you kind of lean into them, you never do really drive the hooks. So I've gotten, over the last couple of years, I throw a Denali medium heavy jade wood. Just hit a stump right there. I throw that medium heavy jade wood for the really big crankbaits like the 6XD and now the 10XD and the big Lucky Craft crankbait. I've gotten to where I throw a 8-foot Dobbins Randy Maccabee crankbait rod, and that 8-foot rod will throw a crankbait a mile. You can fish for fish in Tennessee from Kentucky with that thing. It's nuts how far it'll throw a crankbait. Even a small one, you can put like a bait that runs like 10 foot and put it on that. And I've got it with the lures, the original BB1 lures that they came out with, or that they re-released, I should say, last year. I guess it's not really the original. But the re-release that they came out with last year, this year they came out with the BB1 Pro, but last year they came out with just a straight BB1. I've got that on that 8-foot rod. I mean, it will throw a crankbait a mile. I've never seen a combo throw one that good. But I get a 5.3 to 1, 5.4 to 1 reel. I like the standard Lew's speed spool. It's a good workhorse reel. Of course, that BB1, I really like a Revo winch. All of those are great rods and reel combos for deep cranking. And then fishing line, I don't get too crazy with it. I'll go down to 10 pound. If there's a lot of cover and I'm gonna be fishing it just a little bit shallower, say it's like 10 foot on top and I'm sitting out in 20, I might put a little heavier line, like say 12 pound, maybe go up to 14 pound if I'm throwing a big bait. And I want to cover that top and cover down the side a little bit. And then the other thing I tell people, and you'll see kind of on some of these fish catches, I tell people, don't grab your rod and squeeze it really hard. I kind of point my arm and my rod and all in one direction here. Try to hold my arm as straight as possible. They've actually come out with some rods. Power Tackle had these palm grip rods. I think Lew's has got them now too. That kind of takes the kink out of your wrist. If you hold a normal rod, you got a little bit of a kink in your arm. And with those palmable ones, you put your fingers all in front and it makes a straight line. But the main thing I tell people is just don't squeeze your rod and try to hold it really still and reel as hard as you can. I actually keep both hands pretty loose Not so loose that if one bites and I go to set the hook, it's gonna pop out of my hand. But you know, I got it pretty loose. You can see the rod moves as I reel. I can reel real fast. And see, I can do that without wearing myself out. That's a big key with crankbaiting. Just being able to throw it all day. Not wearing your arm out and getting a kink in your wrist. And so I try to keep everything fairly loose on there. And then if one strikes, you know, I'll lay it onto my side, turn the rod, and you can lean into them pretty good. As far as crankbaits, I mean, gosh, there's a bunch of good crankbaits now. You know, used to it wasn't that way. Everybody threw about 2 crankbaits, but now you got Spro's got awesome deep divers. Those DD crankbaits, and now the baby DD. You got Strike King, of course, has awesome deep cranking baits. 5XD, 6XD, 10XD. A staple for me is, for a long time, has been a fat-free shad. I grew up fishing on Lake Dardanelle, and that was an awesome fish catcher on that lake, and it works really good on a Kentucky lake. I've caught them on that bait, but everywhere. Arkansas, Texas, Mexico, California, up in New York. I mean, some of these crankbaits, it don't matter where you're fishing, they're great baits, but I keep the baits themselves pretty simple. Shad colors, of course, chartreuses. For deep diving, I really don't see a need for a crawfish pattern. I might get one with a bluegill pattern, but that's essentially my go-to baits: the Strike Kings, the Bomber Fat Frees, Spro DDs, and then of course Rapalas. DT16, DT10. I really like that DT10. That's a fish catcher. You know, when you get on those places where you're throwing up into 8 or 10 foot of water. There we go. Right, I did right there. While I was talking, I got hung on a stump. The biggest thing is when you're fishing around cover with a deep diver, you got to kind of worm the bait through there. You know, if you drive it in there as hard as you can and then swing into it, you can't really get that bait loose. You're gonna have to go up there and you might mess up your spot. But if you hit a piece of cover and you're delicate with it, and you know, people do this trick all the time, popping the line. That works, but you need to focus on the slack. It's not how hard you pull the bow and arrow and snap it. It's how much slack you can send back to the lure. That's what frees your bait. So if you're patient, don't go to just swinging into, you know, whatever you got stuck on. You can get them unhung most of the time. And right there, I drove into a stump and thought I was gonna have to go up there and get it, but put a little more slack in my line and was able to pop it off there. Biggest thing I get asked too is, why do I have so many crankbaits on the deck at one time? I have found more often than not, when you get a school going and you catch 4 or 5 on a crankbait and then you go 5 or 6 casts without catching one, you'll just put that crankbait down, pick up one that's totally different sound, different colored, a little different depth maybe, and fire it up in there. You can catch a whole bunch more. And then you can even switch back to the original one that you were catching on. You just keep switching it up on them, and you can extend that crankbait bite for, you know, 10, 15, 20 fish. And I've also found it's interesting that you'll catch them, you know, you'll be catching them on one color and they'll quit biting it for a second, and you'll pick up a different one and fire it up in there and catch a big one. I've had that happen a bunch of times. So that's why I have so many different rods and different crankbaits tied on. I've just found over the years, all the places that I fish, that if you have a bunch of different crankbaits tied on, you can catch a lot more bass.